In the ashes of defeat after World War I, a wounded Germany searched desperately for hope. A nation humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, its economy shattered, its pride stolen, and within that darkness, a single voice began to rise. A man who promised to restore Germany's greatness, Adolf Hitler. Born in Austria, Hitler's early years were filled with rejection, frustration, and hatred. An artist denied, a soldier wounded by war. His soul was shaped by pain and resentment. After Germany's loss in the First World War, Hitler found purpose in politics, joining the German Workers' Party, which he soon transformed into a movement of fear and fanaticism. The Nazi Party. He preached of purity, unity, and vengeance. His words were fire igniting the hearts of millions who longed for pride once more. But hidden behind his promises was a nightmare, a dream built on hatred of Jews, communists, and anyone he deemed unworthy. Germany was desperate, unemployment soared, hunger spread, and faith was dying. When Hitler spoke, people listened. His charisma was unmatched. His rallies were grand theaters of power, flags waving, torches burning, and the cry of "Heil Hitler" echoing across cities. In 1933, through manipulation, fear, and lies, Hitler rose to the position of chancellor. Within months, democracy was gone, replaced by dictatorship. The world watched, unsure, unaware that the storm of the century had begun to form. This was not just the rise of a man, it was the birth of a movement that would consume the world in fire. This was the beginning of Hitler's dream, a dream that would soon become the world's greatest nightmare. By 1934, Germany was no longer a democracy. Adolf Hitler had transformed the fragile Weimar Republic into a totalitarian state. The Third Reich, every voice that dared to question him was silenced, every rival crushed. The Nazi propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, painted Hitler as a savior, the man chosen by destiny to restore Germany's greatness. Posters, films, and rallies glorified his image. Children grew up chanting his name. Schools rewrote history. The world had never seen manipulation of such scale. The Nazi vision was simple, yet terrifying. A pure Aryan race, united under one leader, marching toward conquest. The swastika became a symbol of fear, flying over cities that once believed in freedom. The Gestapo, Hitler's secret police, spread terror in every neighborhood. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Whispers could mean death. In 1935, Hitler unveiled the Nuremberg Laws, stripping Jews of citizenship and basic rights. It was the beginning of systematic persecution, the foundation of genocide yet to come. The Jewish people were blamed for everything: Germany's loss in the Great War, its economic collapse, its humiliation. Lies became truth, and truth became treason. At the same time, Hitler began rebuilding the German military, in open violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Tanks rolled off production lines, fighter planes filled the skies. The youth were trained to fight and die for the Führer. The drums of war began to beat once more, softly at first, then louder with every passing month. Europe watched with uncertainty. Some saw a leader bringing order to chaos. Others saw a monster rising from the shadows. But one thing was clear: Hitler was preparing Germany for something far greater than revenge. He was preparing it for domination. Under the black banners and burning torches, a nation marched in perfect rhythm, blind to the truth. The world thought peace still had a chance, but the storm was only just beginning. The dream of one man had now become the destiny of millions. By the late 1930s, the world stood uneasy. Hitler's power was no longer confined to speeches or parades. It was spreading like wildfire across Europe. The dream of empire had begun to take shape. In 1936, Germany marched into the Rhineland, a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The world watched and did nothing. Britain and France, haunted by the memory of World War I, feared another conflict. Their silence gave Hitler confidence, and with it, ambition. Soon, his gaze turned toward his homeland, Austria. In 1938, without firing a single bullet, German troops rolled into Vienna. Crowds cheered, believing they were witnessing unity. The world called it Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. But behind the celebrations was terror. dissenters arrested, Jewish families attacked, and the Nazi flag raised over every building. Next came Czechoslovakia. Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, claiming it was home to ethnic Germans. Britain's Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, desperate to avoid war, Hitler in Munich. The infamous Munich Agreement was signed, giving Hitler what he wanted in exchange for peace. Chamberlain returned to London declaring, "Peace for our time," but it was a lie, a peace built on fear. Within months, Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia, shattering the illusion of diplomacy. Now, only one obstacle remained: Poland. Hitler's generals prepared for invasion, and a secret pact was formed with his unlikely ally, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact divided Eastern Europe between them, ensuring no resistance from the East. The world trembled. Newspapers spoke of another war, yet leaders hesitated. The lessons of 1914 had faded. The world stood on the edge of the abyss, uncertain, afraid, and unprepared. And as dawn broke on September 1, 1939, the nightmare began. German tanks crossed the Polish border, airplanes screamed overhead, cities burned, and history turned its darkest page. World War II had begun. Hitler's dream was now in motion. The world's nightmare had just come to life. The morning of September 1 Street, 1939, changed the world forever. At dawn, German planes screamed across the Polish sky, dropping bombs over cities, railways, and defenses. Tanks thundered through the countryside. The attack was swift, precise, and devastating. A new kind of warfare had been born: blitzkrieg, the lightning war. Poland's army fought bravely, but they were no match for the speed and power of Germany's mechanized forces. Within weeks, Polish defenses crumbled, and on September 17, from the east, the Soviet Union invaded, fulfilling their secret pact with Hitler. Poland was torn apart, its people crushed between two brutal powers. Britain and France, bound by treaty, declared war on Germany, but it was too late. The world was now engulfed in flames. Yet, for months, the Western Front remained eerily quiet. Soldiers waiting, watching, and wondering when the storm would reach them. Historians would later call it the phony war. Then, in April 1940, blitzkrieg struck again, this time against Denmark and Norway. The German war machine swept through both nations in days. By May, the assault turned west: Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and finally, France. Hitler's forces moved like lightning, bypassing fortifications, cutting off entire armies, surrounding them before they could react. The French believed the Maginot Line would protect them, but Hitler's tanks simply went around it through the Ardennes forest, where no army was supposed to pass. Paris fell in just 6 weeks. France, the symbol of European pride, surrendered. Britain now stood alone. Across the English Channel, German troops celebrated victory, raising their flags over conquered lands. Hitler's empire was growing, stretching from the Atlantic to the borders of Russia. The world gasped as the unthinkable had happened. Europe had fallen to a single man's ambition. And yet, even in triumph, Hitler's hunger grew. The lightning wars had given him everything he wanted except peace. For peace was never his dream. His dream was domination. And soon, his eyes would turn toward the last free nation standing: Great Britain. The summer of 1940, Europe had fallen. France was defeated. The Nazi flag flew from Paris to Prague. And across the English Channel, one small island nation stood alone: Great Britain. Hitler believed Britain would seek peace, but Britain refused. Under the leadership of Winston Churchill, a man of steel words and unbreakable spirit, the British vowed never to surrender. In Parliament, Churchill's voice thundered: "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender." Hitler ordered Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. But first, he had to destroy the Royal Air Force RAF. Thus began one of the greatest battles in modern history, the Battle of Britain. German bombers darkened the skies, attacking airfields, radar stations, and cities. The RAF, outnumbered and exhausted, fought back with unmatched courage. Every dogfight was a matter of life and death. Pilots as young as 19 soared into the clouds, facing swarms of enemy aircraft. They were known as the few. Churchill later said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." When the Luftwaffe failed to destroy the RAF, Hitler changed his strategy. He began the Blitz, a relentless bombing campaign against British cities. London burned night after night. Families hid in underground shelters as explosions thundered above. Fires turned the sky red. Yet, through the ruins and the smoke, the British spirit did not break. Children played in rubble. Soldiers sang songs of defiance. The Union Jack still waved high over Westminster. By the end of 1940, the Battle of Britain was over. Hitler's forces had suffered their first defeat. His dream of conquering Britain had failed. But instead of retreating, he turned his fury elsewhere, toward the east. He would now challenge his greatest enemy yet, Joseph Stalin and the vast, frozen lands of the Soviet Union. The world held its breath, for the nightmare was about to grow darker than ever before. Summer, 1941. Europe lay under the shadow of the swastika. Hitler stood triumphant yet restless. His next target was vast, dangerous, and unbroken: the Soviet Union. Despite the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Hitler despised Stalin's communist state. He saw it as both a threat and an opportunity. A land rich in oil, wheat, and labor. And deep within his ideology burned a hatred for Slavs and communists alike. On June 22, 1941, without warning, Germany unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers stormed across an 180-mile front. Tanks crushed Soviet defenses. Bombers tore through cities. Within weeks, entire armies collapsed. The speed was overwhelming. Another blitzkrieg. Hitler's dream of a war of annihilation had begun. In the early days, German forces swept through Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were captured. Villages burned, and behind the front lines, a darker force followed: the Einsatzgruppen, Nazi death squads, who murdered Jews, political leaders, and anyone deemed inferior. But the Soviet Union was not Poland or France. The land was endless, the resistance fierce. As summer faded, Hitler's troops reached the gates of Moscow. Victory seemed within reach until the weather turned. The Russian winter descended like a curse. Temperatures dropped below 30°C. Engines froze. Weapons jammed. Soldiers wrapped newspapers around their feet for warmth. The mighty German war machine began to break. Then came Soviet reinforcements, newly armed and prepared to die for their motherland. On December 5, 1941, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack, pushing the Germans back from Moscow. For the first time, Hitler's army was stopped. The frozen fields of Russia swallowed 500,000 men. The dream of quick victory had turned into a nightmare of ice, blood, and death. But Hitler refused to retreat. He demanded that his soldiers hold their ground, no matter the cost. And in doing so, he sealed his fate, and the fate of the Reich. The Eastern Front had become a graveyard for his ambition. The nightmare had truly begun to consume its creator. While Hitler's armies raged across Europe, another war was being fought, one not on battlefields, but in ghettos, camps, and gas chambers. A war against humanity itself. From the earliest days of Nazi rule, hatred of the Jewish people had been at the core of Hitler's ideology. He blamed them for Germany's defeat, its economy, and every imagined weakness. But under the cover of war, this hatred turned into a plan, the final solution. Across occupied Europe, Jews were forced into ghettos, walled-off prisons within cities like Warsaw and starvation, disease, and fear filled every street. Families were torn apart. Children cried for bread that never came. Then began the deportations. Trains packed with men, women, and children, all headed east. Few knew where they were going. Even fewer returned. Their destination: concentration camps. Places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, names that would forever define the depths of human cruelty. At Auschwitz, trains arrived daily. Guards separated families with a wave of the hand. Left for labor, right for death. Gas chambers disguised as showers ended thousands of lives in minutes. Their bodies were burned in crematoria. Their possessions sorted, stolen, and catalogued. The Nazi system had turned murder into industry. By 1943, the Holocaust had spread across Europe. Millions of Jews, along with Roma, political prisoners, and others the Nazis deemed unfit, were executed in cold precision. It was a genocide without mercy, designed not for victory, but for extermination. And yet, amidst this horror, there were acts of defiance. Prisoners smuggled messages to the outside world. Some escaped to tell the truth. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943 saw starving Jews rise against their captors, fighting not for life, but for dignity. By the war's end, 6 million Jews had been murdered. Mothers, fathers, children, entire communities erased from history. The Holocaust was not just a crime against a people, it was a crime against the soul of humanity. As the smoke of Auschwitz darkened the sky, the world would later ask, how did this happen? And the answer would echo through time, because the world looked away too long. By the early 1940s, Hitler's war was no longer a European conflict, it had become a global catastrophe. Nations from every corner of the world were drawn into the chaos, forming two great alliances: the Axis powers Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allies led by Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and later, the United States. Far across the Pacific, another empire was rising. Japan, hungry for resources and dominance, had already invaded China and terrorized Asia. Its brutal campaign left millions dead. The massacre at Nanking became a symbol of unimaginable cruelty. But the world's attention was still on Europe, until one fateful morning. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japanese aircraft descended upon the American naval base in Hawaii, unleashing a storm of fire and destruction. Battleships burned, sailors drowned, and the Pacific roared with explosions. In just 2 hours, over 2,000 Americans were dead. The next day, the United States declared war, and the world was now fully ablaze. Hitler rejoiced, declaring war on America as well. He believed the US would be too far, too slow to make a difference. But he was wrong. The arsenal of democracy had awakened. Factories across America thundered with life. Tanks, planes, and weapons rolled out in numbers the world had never seen. Ordinary men and women became soldiers, pilots, and factory workers. For the first time, humanity was united against a single nightmare. Across Africa, Allied and Axis troops clashed in deserts and dunes. In the skies of the Pacific, American pilots fought Japanese Zeros over endless blue. And in the oceans, submarines stalked merchant ships like predators in the dark. The war had reached every land and sea, from the frozen Arctic to the jungles of Burma, from the Atlantic waves to the Pacific Islands. Millions of lives were now bound by the same fate. But as the Allies began to push back, Hitler's arrogance grew. He believed himself unstoppable, a god of war. Yet even as he expanded the front lines, his empire began to crack. His greatest mistake was yet to come, a decision that would turn his dream into ashes. The world was fighting back, and soon, the nightmare would begin to crumble. For years, Hitler's armies had crushed every enemy before them. But by 1942, the tide of war was beginning to turn. The unstoppable machine of the Third Reich had met its match, in courage, in strategy, and in sacrifice. On the frozen plains of Stalingrad, the German advance met brutal resistance. The city became a symbol of defiance, rubble, smoke, and death everywhere. Every street, every building, became a battlefield. Soviet soldiers fought house to house, refusing to surrender. Hitler ordered his men to take the city at any cost. Stalin ordered his to defend it to the last man. For 6 months, Stalingrad burned, and when winter came, the hunter became the hunted. The Soviet counterattack surrounded the German Sixth Army, cut off from supplies. Freezing and starving, 300,000 men were trapped. In February 1943, they surrendered. It was the first major defeat for Hitler. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. At the same time, far across the sands of North Africa, British and Allied forces under General Montgomery faced the legendary German commander Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox. At El Alamein, after months of brutal combat, the Allies broke through. Churchill declared with pride, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." And across the Pacific, the U.S. Navy achieved a miracle at Midway. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the heart of Japan's fleet, were destroyed in a single battle. From that day, Japan's empire would only shrink, never expand again. By the end of 1943, the Axis dream was dying. The Allies had momentum. Hitler's armies were retreating on every front: east, west, north, and south. The world could feel the change, the first signs of hope rising from the ashes of despair. But Hitler refused to accept defeat. He demanded more sacrifices, more lives, more blood. As the Allies advanced, he ordered cities burned, soldiers executed for retreating, and his people to fight to the last breath. The war that Hitler had begun to build his empire was now destroying it from within. By 1944, the world had suffered nearly 5 years of war, but finally, hope began to rise from the West. The Allies were ready to strike at the heart of Hitler's empire, to liberate Europe and end the nightmare. The plan was daring, the largest seaborne invasion in human history. Its name, Operation Overlord. Its day of reckoning, June 6, 1944. The world would remember it forever as D-Day. In the early morning darkness, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel toward the beaches of Normandy, France. The sea was rough, the sky gray. Soldiers whispered prayers as bullets awaited them on the other side. As the first landing craft dropped their ramps, a storm of gunfire erupted. German machine guns rained death from the cliffs above. The beaches codenamed Omaha, Utah, Juneau, Gold, and Sword became fields of chaos. Men fell, drowned, and bled, but they kept moving. Step by step, they advanced through the fire. Courage became stronger than fear. By nightfall, the beaches were taken. The Allies had secured a foothold in Europe. From Normandy, the liberation began. French resistance fighters rose in rebellion. American, British, and Canadian forces pushed inland, breaking through the Nazi defenses. Town after town, city after city, freedom returned. The bells of Paris rang once more in August 1944. As the Allies marched through the Champs-Élysées, the people cheered, wept, and embraced the soldiers who had brought them back their lives. But for Hitler, it was the beginning of the end. He raged inside his bunker, refusing to believe the truth. His empire was collapsing, his armies retreating on all fronts. The Allies were closing in from the west, and the Red Army was advancing from the east. Europe had been a continent in chains. Now, with D-Day, the key had turned. The tide of history had shifted. The nightmare was breaking apart, and the world could finally see the dawn. By early 1945, the empire that Hitler once dreamed would last 1,000 years was collapsing in less than 12. The Third Reich was dying city by city, street by street. The Red Army stormed in from the east, taking Warsaw, Budapest, and Vienna. From the west, the Allied forces crossed the Rhine and entered Germany itself. Everywhere, destruction reigned. German cities lay in ruins, fire, rubble, and silence. The once proud symbols of Nazi power now stood as broken monuments to madness. Inside Berlin, chaos consumed the capital. Sirens wailed day and night. Civilians hid in basements as bombs fell without mercy. The streets that once echoed with Hitler's parades were now filled with hunger, fear, and death. In his underground bunker, Hitler refused to accept reality. He raged at his generals, accused them of betrayal, and demanded impossible victories. But his armies were gone. His allies Italy and Japan were doomed. Only a few loyal followers remained, trapped with him beneath the collapsing city. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops closed in just streets away, Hitler made his final choice. He ended his life in the bunker that had become his tomb, the dream of the Reich dying with him. Outside, the Red Army raised its flag over the Reichstag. Berlin had fallen. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Across the world, church bells rang. People danced in the streets, and tears of relief flowed. The nightmare was finally over. But the cost was beyond imagination. More than 70 million dead. Entire cities erased, nations shattered, and generations scarred forever. When the smoke cleared, the world saw the true horror of Nazi rule. The concentration camps, the mass graves, the silent witnesses of genocide. Humanity had won the war, but lost its innocence. The fall of the Third Reich was not just the end of a regime. It was a warning to all time that hatred, unchecked, can destroy the very world it seeks to control. The guns had fallen silent. The world stood in ruins. Cities lay as skeletons of stone, fields burned black, and millions wandered with no home, no family, and no hope. World War II had ended, but its shadow would haunt generations. From the ashes of Berlin to the rubble of Tokyo, humanity faced a question deeper than any victory. How do you rebuild a world that almost destroyed itself? In Europe, survivors searched through debris for loved ones who would never return. Refugees flooded the roads, their eyes empty from years of war. The Nuremberg trials began where Nazi leaders faced justice for crimes the world could barely comprehend. Words like genocide and crimes against humanity entered history for the first time. The world had vowed, never again. Across the seas, in Japan, two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had vanished in flashes of fire. The atomic age had begun, and with it, a new kind of fear. Humanity had unlocked the power to end itself. But even in the ruins, something extraordinary began. The victors did not seek vengeance, they sought peace. From the rubble of hatred rose the dream of unity. Nations came together to create the United Nations, born in 1945 with a single promise: to prevent another war like this, to give humanity a voice against tyranny. In America, Europe, and Asia, rebuilding began. Factories were restored, schools reopened, and hope slowly returned to faces that had forgotten how to smile. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Western Europe, and former enemies became allies. The same Germany and Japan that once sought domination now pursued democracy and peace. But the scars remained in memories, in graves, and in hearts. Every monument, every name on a memorial stone, whispered the same truth: freedom has a cost, and peace must never be taken for granted. The world had been burned to its foundations, yet from that fire, it was reborn. A world wiser, humbler, and forever changed. Hitler's dream had become the world's nightmare, but from that nightmare, humanity awoke, determined never to repeat it. The war had ended, but its echoes would never fade. World War II had changed everything: politics, technology, borders, and above all, humanity itself. From the ashes of destruction, a new world was born, a world forever marked by what it had seen. Empires fell, nations rose. The dream of domination had given way to a dream of peace. In classrooms and memorials, stories of courage and cruelty began to be told. The names of heroes, soldiers, nurses, resistance fighters, and ordinary people who risked everything became eternal. But alongside them were the silent victims, the millions who vanished in camps, ghettos, and battlefields. Their memory became a warning written into the heart of mankind. The war had shown the power of hatred, but it had also revealed the strength of unity. When the world stood together against tyranny, freedom triumphed. That truth became the foundation of the modern age. Science, once used to destroy, was now turned toward healing. Nations that once bombed each other now collaborated in medicine, technology, and space. The same skies that had rained fire in 1945 would, just 2 decades later, carry humans to the moon. But peace was not perfect. The Cold War began a silent struggle of ideology and fear. The world had avoided another global conflict, but the shadow of nuclear weapons remained. It reminded humanity that power, without wisdom, could once again bring ruin. As time passed, survivors grew old, and memories began to fade. Yet every generation must remember. Every war monument, every faded photograph, every silent grave tells the same truth: that war is not glory, it is loss. The legacy of World War II is not just history, it is a message that hatred, if left unchecked, can destroy civilizations, and that unity, compassion, and courage can rebuild them. When we remember the millions who suffered, we honor them not only with tears, but by ensuring that their pain was not in vain. The story of Hitler's dream and the world's nightmare is the story of what humanity must never become again. It is also the story of what humanity can become when it chooses hope over hate and peace over power.